pouring in from China, and I had a deal with President Xi. He was going to give the death penalty to anybody manufacturing fentanyl in China and selling it to the United States.
At 9:47 p.m. in a quiet Georgia parking lot, federal agents were waiting for a man who looked completely harmless. He was loading bottled water into the back of a silver SUV. No weapons, no bodyguards, no suspicious behavior, just another suburban shopper finishing his night. But according to Homeland Security, that man was quietly connected to a $400 million criminal network, stretching from cartel strongholds in Mexico to underground banking rings in China, all the way back to million-dollar homes hiding industrial drug labs in American suburbs. For nearly 10 months, agents tracked his late-night drives, his structured cash drops, and his silent meetings with logistics brokers. They weren't watching a small-time courier. They were watching the financial bloodstream of a multinational operation. And when they finally moved in, it didn't just expose one man. It cracked open one of the largest coordinated drug and money laundering networks ever uncovered in the southeastern United States. What investigators found next would shock even seasoned federal agents, because this wasn't street crime. This was a global supply chain hiding in plain sight. What first tipped investigators off wasn't a dramatic raid or border seizure. It was a pattern. By late 2023, analysts with Homeland Security Investigations and the DEA noticed something strange happening in Georgia. Seizures of synthetic drugs, especially fentanyl and high-purity meth, were climbing fast. Not gradually, not seasonally, sharply. And yet, there were no signs of the usual border smuggling surge. That's what didn't make sense. Normally, when fentanyl floods a region, it traces back to clear trafficking corridors. But this time, Georgia was seeing record-level seizures without the expected pipeline from the southwest border. It was as if the drugs were materializing inside the state. Then came the second red flag. Customs data revealed a more than 300% spike in shipments labeled as industrial solvents, cleaning agents, and chemical stabilizers arriving from parts of China, including Shenzhen, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Proper documentation, correct classifications, duties paid. But when random samples were tested in federal labs, the results told a different story. These weren't ordinary industrial chemicals. They were key precursor compounds, the building blocks used to manufacture synthetic opioids and methamphetamine, legal to ship under certain classifications, devastating when diverted into the wrong hands. And Georgia wasn't chosen by accident. Atlanta sits at the crossroads of major interstates, freight rail lines, and one of the busiest cargo airports in the world. From there, distribution across the East Coast can happen within hours. What looks like a regional shipment can quietly become a multi-state operation overnight. Investigators now believe that Mexican trafficking organizations, including networks linked to the Sinaloa cartel, weren't just moving finished drugs anymore. They were adapting, partnering with Chinese chemical suppliers who could ship precursors legally, quietly, in bulk. The drugs weren't being smuggled in fully formed. They were being assembled domestically. And that shift changed everything. But drugs weren't the real engine. The addresses didn't match the crime. Johns Creek, Alpharetta, Gwinnett County, tree-lined streets, top-ranked schools, nearly million-dollar homes with manicured lawns and 3-car garages. But behind some of those polished front doors, federal agents say something far darker was unfolding. Living rooms had been stripped down to bare concrete. Stainless steel tables replaced family furniture. Bedrooms were converted into chemical drying rooms. Attics were packed with industrial ventilation systems running 24 hours a day to filter fumes that couldn't escape through ordinary windows. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. Inside, it was full-scale production. According to DEA seizure logs, one property in Johns Creek alone contained enough raw fentanyl to create millions of potentially fatal doses if distributed on the street. Not small batches, not amateur mixing. industrial output hidden inside suburban homes. Neighbors later told investigators they had noticed a constant humming sound, a low mechanical buzz that never seemed to stop. Most assumed it was air conditioning. Maybe a home renovation, maybe a server room. It wasn't. It was chemical processing. Precursors shipped through legitimate cargo channels were disappearing into quiet garages and coming back out as finished narcotics. The houses weren't just stash locations, they were manufacturing hubs, designed to operate for months without drawing attention. No loud parties, no visible security, no obvious traffic, just silence. And that silence allowed production to scale. By mid-2024, investigators realized they weren't looking at scattered labs. They were looking at a coordinated network embedded inside stable, affluent communities, strategically chosen because no one expects industrial drug operations behind decorative wreaths and HOA guidelines. And once agents began connecting property records, shell companies, and utility spikes, a much bigger pattern emerged. Then, agents realized the scale was far bigger.
The drugs were only half the story. As agents followed the money, they uncovered something far more powerful: an underground banking network tied to Chinese financial brokers operating outside traditional systems. Cash wasn't wired normally. It moved through shadow transactions, coded transfers, and shell companies designed to leave no obvious trail. In Norcross, a trucking company that barely hauled real freight was caught transporting sealed boxes packed with currency. Inside containers labeled office supplies, agents found $14 million in cash. At the same time, nail salons and spas across metro Atlanta were reporting revenue that didn't match their customer traffic. Small storefronts were quietly moving massive sums. Federal estimates later revealed the network laundered around $410 million in just 2 years. The labs made the drugs, but the money machine made the operation unstoppable. And once investigators saw the full scale of it, they knew it was time to shut it down all at once.
And in the end, this wasn't just about drugs or cash. It was about a global network operating in silence, inside quiet suburbs, behind legitimate-looking businesses, hidden in plain sight. Million-dollar homes became production sites, small storefronts moved millions, and nearly $500 million flowed through the system before the public ever knew. If a $410 million operation could run for years without drawing attention, how many others are still operating right now? Modern crime doesn't always look like street gangs or dramatic border crossings. It looks like supply chains, shell companies, everyday neighborhoods. And that's what makes it dangerous. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of how these networks really operate, hit like so more people see it. Subscribe for more fact-based deep dives into real federal operations happening across the country. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think cases like this are isolated, or do you believe similar networks are active in other states right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it.